Chapter 7. After the Storm. Olivia stood frozen as the door clicked shut behind Alex. His absence was immediate, like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving her gasping for breath. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the floor, the sobs ripping through her like waves crashing on the shore. She was drowning in the pain of it, the weight of her decisions crashing down like a tidal wave. How had she let this happen? How had she let him walk away? She hugged herself tightly, trying to hold herself together, but the emptiness gnawed at her, pulling her apart piece by piece. Her engagement ring lay on the coffee table, a cruel reminder of the life she had built, the life she was supposed to want. But all she could think about was Alex, his touch, his smile, the way his eyes burned into hers, making her feel like the only person in the world. It was overwhelming, consuming her, and now that he was gone, the absence of him felt unbearable. She knew she should call him, beg him to come back. But what would she say? What could she say to fix the wreckage they had both created? The truth was a tangled mess, and she was trapped in the middle of it. The knock on the door startled her. For a brief moment her heart leaped, hoping, praying, that it was Alex, that he had come back, that he couldn't stay away either. She rushed to the door, yanking it open, her breath catching in her throat. But it wasn't Alex. It was Mark. Her fiancé stood there, his eyes scanning her face, taking in the tears streaking her cheeks and the disheveled state of her clothes. He frowned, stepping inside, his presence overwhelming the small apartment. "Olivia, what's going on?" His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a tension she had never noticed before. Olivia opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She couldn't find a way to explain what had just happened, what had been happening for weeks now. The lies, the betrayal, the heartache. It was all too much, and she felt herself crumbling under the weight of it. "Olivia." Mark's voice was firmer now, his eyes narrowing as he reached out to touch her arm. "Talk to me." She flinched at his touch, stepping back instinctively, and Mark's expression darkened. He looked down at her hand, at the bare finger where her engagement ring had been, just hours ago. "Where's your ring?" he asked quietly, his voice laced with suspicion. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the moment of reckoning. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "Mark, I need to tell you something." Mark's eyes hardened, his jaw clenched as he waited for her to speak. "I've made a mistake," she began, her voice shaking. Before she could finish, Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen, and his face paled. "What the hell is this?" His voice was sharp now, filled with disbelief as he turned the phone toward her. It was a photo of her and Alex, their kiss from earlier. The image seared into her mind, now visible on the screen. Someone had taken it. Someone had seen them. Her heart dropped into her stomach. "Who is this?" Mark demanded, his voice rising. "Olivia, who the hell is this guy?" Olivia's breath hitched. The walls were closing in again, the world tilting on its axis as she struggled to find her footing. She had known this would happen eventually, but she wasn't ready. Not for this. "Mark, I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" He barked out a harsh laugh, shaking his head. "You're kissing some guy behind my back, and it's not what I think." Tears filled her eyes again, and she could feel the guilt and shame tightening around her chest, like a noose. "It was a mistake," she pleaded. I didn't mean for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." Mark's face twisted in anger, his hands clenched into fists. "How long, Olivia? How long has this been going on?" She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. All she could do was shake her head, the tears falling freely now. "You know what?" Mark's voice was cold, distant, like a stranger's. "I don't even want to hear it. I don't care how long it's been. I'm done." He turned, storming toward the door, leaving her standing there, her heart in pieces on the floor. "Mark, wait!" she called out, her voice desperate. But he didn't stop. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing through the apartment, leaving her in silence once again. And this time, it was unbearable. Chapter 8. The Quiet Reunion. Olivia sat curled up on the couch, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. The city lights outside her window flickered, casting soft shadows across the room. The apartment felt empty, even though she was surrounded by familiar things. It wasn't the space that was missing. It was him. She hadn't heard from Alex in weeks, and the silence had begun to carve a hollow space inside her chest. He had been everything to her, but the chaos of Mark's unexpected reappearance had ripped them apart in a way she hadn't anticipated. And now, she was left with nothing but questions. Her phone vibrated on the table, pulling her out of her thoughts. She glanced at it, half expecting another impersonal message. But it wasn't a notification. It was a knock at her door. Her heart stumbled, an unexpected surge of adrenaline rushing through her. She stood, the cup forgotten on the table, and crossed the room. The moment she opened the door, her breath caught in her throat. Alex. He stood there, his expression unreadable, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, as if he was unsure what to do with them. The sight of him, disheveled, eyes tired, but still filled with that intensity she remembered so well, stirred something deep inside her. "Olivia." His voice was soft, almost tentative, as if he wasn't sure whether he was welcome. She didn't speak. She couldn't. The emotions swirling inside her were too overwhelming. All she could do was step aside, letting him into her space, unsure of what she was allowing into her heart. He closed the door behind him, the quiet click echoing through the room. They stood there for a moment, facing each other, the silence heavy with everything left unsaid. "I shouldn't have left like that," Alex began, his voice low but steady. "I thought I was giving you time, but I was wrong." Olivia swallowed hard, her hands trembling at her sides. "Why now, Alex? After all this time?" He took a small step closer, his eyes searching hers. "Because I couldn't stay away anymore. You've been on my mind every second, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I walked away from something real. I needed to see you, to hear you." The weight of his words hung between them, and Olivia felt her heart beating wildly in her chest. She wanted to be strong, to hold on to the hurt he had caused when he left, but the pull between them was undeniable. "I don't know if I can go through it again," she whispered, her voice trembling with the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. Alex's gaze softened, and he reached out, gently cupping her face with his hand. His touch was warm, familiar, grounding. "I'm not asking for everything right now. I just need to know if you still feel it too." She closed her eyes at his words, letting herself lean into his touch, the warmth of his hand against her cheek. It had been so long since she had let herself feel anything other than confusion and pain. But with Alex standing there, The memories of their time together came flooding back. How he made her laugh. How he made her feel seen. Her breath hitched as his thumb brushed lightly over her skin, the tension between them palpable, electric. Slowly she opened her eyes, meeting his intense gaze. "I still feel it," she admitted, the words barely a whisper. The relief in his eyes was immediate, but he didn't rush. He didn't pull her into some dramatic sweeping gesture. Instead, he took his time, leaning in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. When his lips finally met hers, it was soft, hesitant at first, like a question waiting to be answered. Olivia felt her heart skip as she leaned in, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her fingertips. The kiss deepened gradually, the weight of their time apart dissolving in the warmth of their closeness. It wasn't desperate or rushed. It was patient, filled with all the words they hadn't yet spoken, all the emotions that had been left to linger. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads resting together, Olivia let out a shaky breath, her hands still pressed against him. "I missed you," Alex whispered against her lips, his voice raw with honesty. "I missed you too," she replied, her voice barely audible, but the truth in it unmistakable. And in that moment, they both knew. This wasn't the end of something. It was the quiet beginning of something new, something worth fighting for. Chapter 9. Treading Lightly. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains as Olivia stirred awake. Her body ached in a way that felt unfamiliar, a reminder of the intense emotions and the warmth of Alex's presence from the night before. He had stayed, but it wasn't the reunion she had expected. There had been no sweeping promises, no immediate rekindling of what they once had. It was tentative, fragile, as if they were both afraid to move too fast and break whatever fragile connection still existed. She turned, her eyes falling on the empty space beside her. Alex was gone. Her heart skipped, panic rushing in before her mind caught up. It wasn't that he'd left. She could hear the faint sounds of movement from the kitchen. The smell of coffee wafted through the air, calming her racing thoughts. He was still here. For now. Olivia slipped out of bed, wrapping herself in the oversized sweater that hung loosely off her shoulder, and padded softly down the hall. She found him standing by the window, coffee cup in hand, gazing out at the city as if he was lost in thought. The morning light illuminated his profile, highlighting the tension in his shoulders. She watched him for a moment, unsure of how to approach. Things between them felt so delicate, like walking on glass. "Hey," she said softly, her voice tentative as she leaned against the doorframe. Alex turned, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips as he saw her. "Morning." "Morning," she echoed, her eyes searching his face. The weight of everything unspoken hung between them, making the air feel thick. "You stayed." "I couldn't leave again," Alex admitted, setting the coffee cup down on the windowsill. He crossed the room slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I told you I wouldn't hurt you again." Olivia's heart fluttered, but she remained cautious. There was still so much to be said, so much left unresolved. "Alex, I don't know how we can fix this." He stopped in front of her, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, hesitant, as if he wasn't sure if she'd pull away. "We don't have to fix everything right now. Let's just start." She exhaled slowly, nodding as she felt the weight of his hand on her skin, the warmth radiating from him making her stomach twist in ways she hadn't allowed herself to feel for weeks. The tension was still there, but it was softer now, like a quiet hum between them. "I want this to work," she whispered, her fingers brushing against his arm, feeling the familiar pull. "But I'm scared, Alex." His eyes softened as he cupped her face with both hands, drawing her closer until their foreheads touched. "I'm scared too," he admitted, "but I'd rather be scared with you than without you." The words hung in the air between them, charged with the weight of everything they'd been through. Olivia felt herself melt a little at his honesty, but still, she hesitated. Before she could say anything more, Alex leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, in a kiss that was soft, patient. It was a kiss that spoke of understanding, of taking their time. But even in its tenderness, there was an undeniable heat behind it, a tension that had been simmering between them for far too long. Her hands slid up his chest, feeling the way his body responded to her touch. His grip on her waist tightened just slightly, grounding her as the kiss deepened. This wasn't about rushing. It was about feeling every second, every breath they shared. When they finally pulled apart, Alex's eyes searched hers. "I don't want to push you, but I also don't want to lose you again." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest as she leaned into him, her fingers still resting against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I don't want to lose you either," she whispered, her voice filled with both fear and hope. Alex's hand slid down to her waist, his thumb brushing the fabric of her sweater as he held her close. "Then let's figure it out. Together." Just as they were finally settling into their quiet moment, the buzz of Olivia's phone interrupted the peace. She pulled back, frowning as she reached for the phone on the counter. A text from Mark. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't spoken to him since the fallout. But now, with Alex standing there, Mark's name flashing on her screen, the weight of everything hit her again. "What is it?" Alex's voice was cautious, sensing the change in her. "It's Mark," Olivia muttered, unsure of how to handle the sudden intrusion of her past. She felt Alex tense beside her. "Are you going to answer it?" His voice was calm, but there was a thread of something darker underneath. Olivia hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. She could feel the shift in the air, the tension creeping back in between them. This was the moment where everything could unravel, where the fragile progress they had made could come crashing down. "I don't know," she admitted, meeting Alex's eyes. There was so much uncertainty in the space between them now.